Good afternoon. Thank you so much for making this session today. I'm really looking forward to it. I've had a little bit to do with the project and speaking to Timor about it as it emerged. And it's a really interesting example of drawing upon the best possible evidence from across the whole continuum and harnessing that to an organisational change initiative. So really valuable and important, both for supporting trauma-informed practices, if that's the direction of your change, but a lot of transferable learnings across other types of organisational change initiatives. So I'm Mandy Charman. I'm the Senior Manager of the Outcome Practice and Evidence Network, and welcome to everyone today. Firstly, we'll acknowledge, really excited for today's sessions. We'd acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the unceded lands we're zooming in from today. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation and pay respects to elders past and present, any Aboriginal colleagues on the call with us today, and the families and children we work alongside. It always makes you feel very grounded when you give your acknowledgement, and very located in place, given where many of us are lucky enough to be able to work from the lands that we live on. We have a wonderful presentation planned from Timor and Claire from the Uniting Vic TAS, which will focus on how Uniting integrated different types of evidence and trauma-informed principles to inform the development of therapeutic model of care, which is now being implemented across the organisation. This was a remarkable piece of work over a very lengthy time. We're really excited to hear from the team and the lessons they've learned and what they can share with you to help you implement organisational practices that are evidence-informed and based on trauma-informed principles. Before we begin our session, we'll just run through a bit of housekeeping. We're all very used to this. If everyone could mute themselves at this point, please. Can you also ensure your Zoom name is your own? It always makes it a bit more meaningful if we actually know who we have in the room. We'll be keeping our cameras on, but feel free to use your video or not as it suits you best. Just know that we do record these sessions because there's a lot of interest amongst those that weren't able to make it here today in sharing the recording. I would advise turn your chat box on. We will have time at the end for some conversation and answering questions that might occur to you through the chat, so through the session. So please put those questions into the chat box as we go, because often we have questions occur to us and then if we wait till the end, we've forgotten what they are, particularly if you're like me. If you have any tech issues, first try leaving the session and rejoining us. This often sorts it out, but if not, private message Emily Inglis, who will have her camera on during the session. We are recording, and I think that about covers it. And I'm hoping you have a really informative time with us today. Now on to the session. Today, the presentation is called Trauma-Informed Insights, Integrating Evidence and Trauma-Informed Practice in Developing United's Therapeutic Model of Care. Uniting is a community service organisation that delivers services and programs across Victoria and Tasmania. So it's actually Uniting Vic TAS is the catch-all. You've undoubtedly heard of them. Today, we're joined by Timor Hussain, who's Practice Leadership and Development Manager. Timor is a registered psychologist and senior leader in the health and community service sector. Timor oversees Uniting's practice leadership unit, leading the development and implementation of the therapeutic model of care. We're also joined by Claire Stanley, who is a service-wide principal practitioner. Claire provides clinical leadership of Uniting's principal practitioner program, which embeds a therapeutic model of care, applies evidenced clinical practice approaches, and uplifts the opportunity to better understand the importance of fostering personal and professional growth in the workforce. Following the presentation, we'll have a time for question. I will curate those and put them to a Timor and or Claire, and we'll have some really interesting conversation. And right at the end, we have some new open announcements and activities to let you know about. I'll hand over now to Timor. Welcome, Timor.
Thank you, Mandy. Welcome, dear colleagues. Give me a moment while I set up the presentation. Wonderful. Okay, so as Mandy mentioned, my name is TmoC, and I look after the Practice Leadership and Development Unit at Uniting. I'm joined today by my co-offender, Claire Stanley. So I will present an overview of the therapeutic model of care, in particular the methodology which we adopted to develop the model of care. And Claire will then provide an example of how we used that methodology to develop a really important aspect of the model of care, which is our approach to risk, which we have titled Risk and the Therapeutic Task. So I'm coming from Wurundjeri land in Strathmore, Melbourne. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. In many ways, this story began in 2017. As I'm sure many of you are aware, over 20 organizations came together to form Uniting. At the time, there was an understandable focus on our governance structures, in addition to our financial, HR, and ICT systems. The stabilization of those structures and systems over time allowed the organization to turn its eye to practice. So in late 2021, discussions began around the need for us to develop a therapeutic model of care for working with children, young people, and families. This model would seek to create a common approach to practice and language for our CYF services. Now, given the profile of the people and communities accessing our services, this model needed to be trauma-informed in its foundation. So there was an initial discussion about whether we purchase an off-the-shelf model or design our own. The organization decided to go down the path of creating our own model for a number of reasons, and I've summarized those reasons on the screen before you. One of the main reasons why we wanted to go down the path of creating our own model was that we believed organizations are at their best and most resilient when they're engaged in a creative process. And we certainly felt the development of a therapeutic model of care would steep the organization in a creative process. One of the other key reasons of why we decided to go down the path of developing our own model of care was a sense of ownership, both in the felt sense, but also in the literal sense of owning our IP and our model of care. So given we were 22 organizations coming together to form Uniting, we felt it was really important to have an organizational sense of ownership over this process. We wanted to develop a model of care where people could hear their voice in it, where they could see themselves in it, where they could feel proud and connected to it. Another key reason of why we went down the path of developing our own model was to promote organizational integration. And certainly that has been the result of this project. I'll talk a little bit later about some of the key elements of the model, but one of the key elements was integrating the model of care with our approach to leadership. This meant that my unit, our practice unit, had to work very closely with our people and culture unit. I can say our people and culture team probably know more about trauma-informed care than they thought they would ever need to learn, before going into those roles. And we certainly have learned a lot about leadership. And that integration has also been replicated, for example, with our quality team. Another reason why we went down the path of developing our own model was to create an opportunity to learn from the experience. We adopted a position of failing forward, knowing that this was a new process for the organization, but the project would also require things from us that perhaps our training and education up until this point hadn't provided. So it was a really powerful opportunity to learn from the experience. And we certainly believe individually and collectively at Uniting, we're in a much better chance to implement other whole of system-wide changes as a result of the learnings we have developed through this project. And another reason was we wanted to develop a model of care ourselves to ensure that we were able to maintain a degree of cultural responsiveness. Now, I mean this in a number of regards. Firstly, as many of you know, at Uniting, we deliver services from East Gippsland all the way down to Hobart. So each of those regions has their own culture, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to honour the local cultural context in the development of the model of care. And we thought we were in a better position to be able to do that if we developed the model of care ourselves. Equally, there is a tremendous amount of commitment on behalf of Uniting and our stakeholders to ensure an Indigenous perspective is fundamental in the foundation of our articulation of what trauma-informed therapeutic care looks like. And we felt we would have a better chance of delivering on that by working with our partners and creating our own model, as opposed to perhaps purchasing a model off the shelf. So after a period of investigation, consultation, and debate, we set out to create our Uniting therapeutic model of care. So the TmoC, as it's known for short, represents our ambition to develop an approach to leadership, culture, and practice that is evidence-informed and recognizes the profound impact of complex trauma on our organization. It seeks to support our workforce to feel confident and competent in their practice, sharing what we already do well, and creating development opportunities to remain contemporary and effective in the way we deliver services. So there are two important key messages in what I just shared. So the first one relates to the underlying conceptual assumption that sits behind the model of care. We wanted to create a model of care that was truly whole of system in its focus. So we wanted to ensure that the practice approach was integrated with our leadership approach, because we believe at Uniting that leaders create the culture of an organization. And also, we didn't want to create an approach to practice that wasn't reflected in the way people we led. We felt that we can't expect our workforce to create trauma-informed and therapeutic service delivery experiences for our consumers if those philosophies aren't replicated in how they are led by the organization and the organizational culture that they work within. So that was the first key conceptual assumption that sat at the foundation of the model of care. The second one is conveyed in that second statement, which is at Uniting, we were already aware that there were examples of excellence as far as trauma-informed and therapeutic service delivery. And the role of the model of care was not to replace existing good practice, but rather it was to understand it, it was to privilege it, and it was to share it more widely so it could become more consistent in its delivery. So we maintained that position throughout the development of the model of care, really wanting to understand what trauma-informed and therapeutic service delivery look like for people, and then raising that so it could be more common and more consistently delivered across the organization. This is a quote from Leonardo da Vinci, who in many ways captures the importance of having a clarity around your theoretical underpinning, and in many ways, this quote symbolizes the ambition of the project as well. So what is the model of care? It was really fascinating. I'll talk about the development life cycle in a moment, but when we began the project, so many people would come up to us and say, so what is the model of care? And I would say, look, we're looking to build the model of care from the ground up. So what do you want it to be? And that was fascinating because people would say in reply to me, yeah, but what is it? And so for me, it was really fascinating that we talk about collaboration and partnership and building things from the ground up in the community services sector. But I actually wonder whether this is in fact people's experience, because with this project, although we stated that as our objective, people would still want to know what it is and not necessarily understand that it was them, in fact, that would play a key role in building it. That I'll get to that in a moment. So in terms of what is the model of care, it's two things. It is an articulation of our approach to leadership, culture, and practice to ensure we support healing for people impacted by complex trauma. So it is a conceptual model, but it also involves a significant investment in practice support. So training, coaching, our principal practitioner program to enable our workforce to feel confident and competent in their practice. So the model of care at Uniting is two things, and one cannot exist without the other. They are mutually dependent on one another. The first is the conceptual model, and the second is the implementation in order to bring that conceptual model to life in the day-to-day service experience of the organization. The model isn't a rigid doctrine. For those who are aware, our CYF service stream at Uniting comprises of 165 programs divided into 5 broad program streams. And we have about 1,000 EFT in our child, youth and family services stream. So it wouldn't work, it'd be impractical to have a rigid and directive model of care, because what might apply in our family services space might not necessarily apply in our foster care space. There's a quote from the model of care: it's not a rigid doctrine, but it's a knowledge and evidence base to draw upon, guiding and supporting people in their challenging work. And this is the real essence of the model: to assist with rather than replace thinking. So we use the other metaphor of, it's not an off the peg or off the shelf outfit that you can use. Rather, we provide the material and the supports, through, for instance, the training program or our principal practitioner program, for our people leaders and our practitioners and our consumers to work together to tailor a garment that is fit for that particular occasion. So we had the privilege of working with the Parenting Research Centre to support our thinking with regards to our design and development approach. And so our approach to the design and development of the model of care is one based on principles, and broadly 4 key principles guided our approach to design and development. So the first one, and I'll go into these in a bit more detail, but the first one was it was evidence informed, it was collaborative, it was iterative, and it was safety conscious. So what sat behind these principles was a belief that if we wanted to develop a trauma-informed therapeutic model of care, then the process itself would need to reflect these principles at its core. So in terms of evidence-informed, I think it's really important to share with you what our understanding of evidence-informed means at Uniting, and certainly this project helped clarify our position on what evidence-informed means. But our methodology was shaped by our commitment to evidence-informed practice. However, we drew on multiple forms of evidence, and we valued these multiple forms of evidence equally. So, of course, we valued the research evidence, but in addition to that, we also valued our practitioner knowledge and skill, in addition to the knowledge, preferences, and values of our children, young people, and families. So we drew on these three sources of evidence to develop our model of care, both the conceptual model, but also how we went about, or how we're going about, its implementation. So this means we engaged meaningfully with our consumers, our practitioners, and our expert advisory group. We conducted targeted literature searches, reviewed the seminal works on trauma and related theories. We cross-referenced those consultations with the researched evidence, and we drew upon some of the key evidence frameworks and practices we use in the CYF service stream, like MARAM and BICM. So Claire will go into a bit more detail of what that looked like in the development of our approach to risk, but I'll share briefly with you the overall approach. So we conducted a series of workforce consultations, again, all the way from East Gippsland down to Hobart. And we met with every CYF service team, and we asked them, in a couple of years, we will present a model of care to you, and you'll be in a room somewhere, undoubtedly, on the other side of that presentation. And when we present that model of care, we need for you to be able to see yourself in it, to hear your voice in it, to feel proud and connected to it. What does this model of care need to be about in order to ensure the likelihood of that experience? So our workforce shared with us what their hopes and ambitions for a therapeutic model of care would be. They spoke about what they're already doing that reflected excellence in terms of trauma-informed and therapeutic service delivery. They spoke about some of the operational dependencies that would be required in order to bring a model of care like this to life. They've had experiences with implementation, whether it was FPR or TOD, so they're able to also tell us what we need to be mindful of in terms of the implementation process. At the end of every consultation, we sent the group we met with a thematic summary and gave them an opportunity to revise it if they felt we hadn't captured their perspectives accurately. We also conducted individual interviews if people were uncomfortable in the group environment. At the end of that process, and there were over 40 group consultations in that first iteration, we went offline and we synthesized that information. We conducted a thematic analysis, and we organized that information into 5 categories: our approach to leadership, our approach to culture, our approach to practice, operational dependencies, and implementation considerations. We then developed the basic architecture of the model of care based on that input. And then we played it back to our workforce. So again, we started from East Gippsland all the way down to Hobart, and we said, this is what you told us the first time around. These are some of the conceptual models that are beginning to emerge. Does this accurately represent what you initially conveyed are your hopes and aspirations for the project? Are we on the right track? Have we left anything out? Now, during that process, we paralleled that with engagement with our consumers. So we established a young person's advisory group that we washed that information through to ensure that their perspective was front and center in the design and development process, and engaged a number of families along the way to wash that information through to make sure their preferences, hopes, and ambitions were also captured. We also had an advisory group made up of some people that you all know, like Janice Mitchell from the Australian Childhood Foundation, Callie Goes from the Sanctuary Institute, Patrick Tomlinson, who was originally from the UK, is in the US, and our reconciliation lead at the time, Eva Orr. So throughout that whole process, we were washing that information through our advisory group as well. All right. So in terms of collaboration, so I kind of touched on that then, but if you think about the saying, it takes a village to raise a child, we certainly came to the belief that it takes a village to develop a therapeutic model of care as well. And so we had a number of internal and external stakeholders involved. So I mentioned our reconciliation lead, Eva Orr, who's not with Uniting anymore, but played a fundamental role in ensuring a First Nations cultural lens was applied to the design and development process. Eva was very busy, so we also worked with Eva to identify and work with Kylie Moore from Boomerang Consultancy. And Vaka also reviewed the model of care and provided some really important feedback as well. We wanted to make sure the model of care was also safe from an LGBTIQ plus cultural perspective. So we had our LGBTIQ plus inclusion lead, Kay Bradshaw, play a really fundamental role in supporting the project along the way. Kay linked us with Merrin Wake, who is an LGBTIQ plus consultant that was able to work with us in the design and development of the model of care, but has stayed on to support us in terms of the development of the training program. And Son Vivian, the CEO from Transgender Victoria, also played a very significant role reviewing content and supporting the development of elements of the model of care. In terms of our governance structure, as many of you appreciate, there's not a whole lot of money in the community services sector, so we needed to make sure that we had a very tight governance structure around the project to ensure we were able to honour the commitments we made as far as the deliverables of the project. So we had an overall governance structure referred to as the Leadership, Culture and Practice Governance Group. We had our CYF Senior Managers Governance Group, which functioned as our steering group for the project. So this was a representation of our CYF senior managers who were very aware of the operational ecosystem and supported decision-making around the project. And I mentioned before also our advisory group made up of Patrick, Janice and Kelly. A project like this that sought to be a whole of system project meant we had to collaborate and work quite closely with a number of internal uniting departments. So people and culture were just wonderful from a leadership perspective, in terms of understanding the importance of integrating this approach with our approach to leadership. And like I said, it's been a really successful partnership. They have learned so much about trauma-informed care, and we have learned so much about people and culture and leadership. Our quality and improvement team, we've all worked with them very closely, but Claire in particular has worked very closely with them, ensuring that our policies and our procedures and our system checklists represent our ambition for trauma-informed therapeutic care. Our mission and equity team worked very closely with us to ensure, particularly around our consumer partnerships, that they were safe and reflected our commitment to honour excellence in how we partnered with our consumers, and our marketing and comms team. At the heart of all of this, was our workforce and our consumers, and they played the fundamental role in sort of shaping the model of care. So to give you an example, before I give the example, so this was harder than what it looked, by the way. So if I think one of my greatest learnings around this was that in order to truly adopt a partnership collaborative model, I think you need to have really realistic expectations for what type of impact it will have on your project, the resources required, and the impacts on timeline. But it enriched the model significantly. So to give you a very simple example, we have a recovery model in the model of care. So originally our recovery model was safety, connection, and healing. We were in Gippsland, and we were talking about elements of the model, including the recovery model. And the executive officer there, Di Fisher, said, look, in a regional rural context, community is fundamental to recovery. So I think, TmoC, you need to add community to your recovery domain. So safety, connection, healing, and community. And it was like, when I heard that, like, how could we miss that? Like, that is absolutely the case. Another example in terms of Claire working on the violence chapter, and obviously we have very much base our understanding of violence through a gendered lens. But with Claire's work with Kylie, Kylie spoke about the importance of making sure a colonization lens was also fundamental in understanding the role of family violence in Indigenous communities, followed by a gendered lens. So all of these collaborations and partnerships, whether it was with our workforce, whether it was with our consumers, whether it was with some of our external partners, really enriched the final product. Iteration, I've sort of covered this, and I'm very conscious of time, so I might skip this. In terms of promoting safety, so we really wanted to make sure, as I said earlier, we reflected the principles of trauma-informed care. So we made a commitment at the team, at a team level, that we would also apply a highly relational approach. So we didn't want people to feel like it was a transaction in terms of the design and development. So myself and my team invested heavily in the relationships with our partners and the people we consulted with. We ensured that we were highly accountable through our commitments via our project governance structure. We made sure roles and responsibilities were clearly explained. We acknowledged power imbalances, and Claire might share in her description how in the consults we made sure that we had people that were at the similar stages as far as career, to make sure that they felt comfortable and confident talking. and had a platform too, even if they were new to Korea. In terms of our consumers, of course, we made sure we reimbursed their participation. We included a diverse range of people and views. We equally valued lived experience and professional expertise. And we sought input and were guided by our diversity and inclusion leads to ensure our consultations with Uniting's priority populations were culturally safe. So what did all of this produce? Well, it produced this conceptual model. So our therapeutic model of care for working with children, young people, and families is primarily founded on 4 key knowledge bases: complex trauma and its developmental impact, trauma neurobiology, attachment theory, and violence in relationships. However, we need to make sense of these knowledge bases through particular lenses. So an intersectional lens is foundational to how we make sense of these knowledge bases, a developmental lens, an ecological and socio-cultural lens, and a strength-based, resilience-minded lens. So those knowledge bases, in combination with those lenses, formed our understanding of trauma-informed care. What sits at the heart of that understanding are our trauma-informed relational practices, which I'll speak very briefly about in a moment. Those 2 things, our organizational trauma-informed care approach and our trauma-informed relational practices, form the foundation of our organizational approach and our practice approach. Our organizational approach is really focused on our approach to trauma-informed leadership and a culture of collective well-being. Our practice approach is based on our recovery model: safety, connection, healing, and community, our overarching approach to working with children, young people, and families, and our approach to risk and the therapeutic task, which Claire will expand on in a moment. So in summary, the model of care is based on these conceptual elements. So our trauma-informed relational practices really sit at the heart, the 2 organizational conceptual elements, and the 3 practice-related conceptual elements. I don't have the time to go into each of those conceptual elements in detail because this presentation is more focused on the methodology that we use. However, we will make the summary of the model of care available, in which you can take a deeper dive into those conceptual elements, and our contact details are also attached to this presentation. So if anyone, and I truly mean that, if anyone wants to know more about the model of care, we'd be happy to take you through some of the conceptual elements. In terms of what we created, so we created a long version of the model of care. So this is the 90,000 word document. It includes a comprehensive literature review related to complex trauma and trauma-informed care, and then goes into detail about our approach to leadership, culture, and practice, and what it needs to look like at Uniting to maintain a trauma-informed system of care. This is our theoretical bedrock. All of our training and coaching programs, our secondary consultation programs, flow from the information contained in this document. We have translated it into an intranet site, so our workforce also has access to this document. We also have a summary version, so that's a much shorter version. It's about 20 pages. We can make that document available externally. So as I said earlier, we will make it available for you to access. In addition to the long version and the summary version, As I mentioned earlier, we have a relationship with the Parenting Research Centre, and we've developed what we're referring to as an evidence and methodology explainer. So that goes into detail about our methodology in developing the model of care and the evidence base that sits behind those conceptual elements. So this document is complete. It's currently going through our editing and design process at Uniting. But this document we are also happy to make available to the sector. So if you're interested in that document, very happy to share with you as well. I spoke about the intranet site, and we're looking at developing an audio book to accompany the model of care. Like many of you, our workforce spends a lot of time on the road, and we had a request to put some of the chapters into an audio book so our workforce can listen to it while they're driving all around East Gippsland, for example. I'm going to wrap up my presentation, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the training program. So we have a really comprehensive training program to support the implementation of the model of care. It's broken up into foundational modules, core modules, extension modules, and enhancement modules. And it's also organized into streams. So we have a trauma-informed care stream, a violence in relationship stream, a case practice stream, a leadership stream, and a volunteer stream. When we say volunteers, we're talking primarily about foster care and kinship carers. And I definitely don't have time to get into this because I need to hand over to Claire. But in case some of you are curious, we also have a monitoring and evaluation a framework that sits over it. So implementation began 1st of July. We're already beginning to pull in data, and I look forward to the opportunity to come back and share some of the data with you. All right, so let me just... Am I back?
Wow. Will you continue to share?
Yes, yes, I'll continue to share and pilot. I just wanted to formally introduce you. So that was it as far as my presentation. I'm going to hand over to Claire now, who's going to take a deeper dive into the methodology that underpinned the development of the conceptual model around our approach to risk and the therapeutic task. All right, over to you, Claire, and I'll organize the presentation.
Thank you, Timo. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Stanley, the Service Wide Principal Prac for Uniting. And currently we have 7 area-based principal pracs delivering this project and applying this project in partnership with our areas, which is very exciting. The risk and the therapeutic task we're presenting today is a kind of a case example of the methodology principles, and I'm going to work sort of within that framework. But what I'd like you to be sort of aware of is a kind of a dual process, because in embedding an approach to the work of developing this chapter and our approach, a practice approach to working with risk, the parallels of the principles for the methodology can be actually seen in the resulting model. And we sort of, our name for that is a walking the talk. And I think it really speaks to that sort of cultural shift where when you're truly trauma-informed, as Timo was explaining, it sort of embeds itself throughout the culture of everything that we do and how we make sense and how we want to be in our work. So I've just sort of, I'm just making you aware of that sort of dual process as we go, but I'll stay more in the methodology. And as Timo mentioned, we were very, very fortunate to have the Parenting Research Centre develop our methodology and evidence explainer, and how they described it, risk and the therapeutic task in that was as a case example, saying that for this element, it is an example of principle-driven methodology in action. So I really wanted to put that in there because that's a really powerful thing to call out in your explainer, and for have a third party identify that, I thought was really a valuable thing to share. So if we sort of, if we go in, I don't know whether you will remember, this won't be a test, but if you were listening very carefully to TmoC, you will remember those 4 principles were evidence-based, collaboration, safety and practice, and I've forgotten one.
Iterative.
Yes, iterative. That's the one I forget because I find it hard to say. So, so let's sort of move in with those. Thank you, TmoC. So let's move with those 4 principles as we go forward. So I've tried to capture how we use those 4 principles. So, in terms of evidence-informed, I think it's really good to sort of start with the idea that we don't all have maybe the same understanding for evidence-informed. So we had to think about our definition. Because there was sort of the evidence of that wisdom that comes through our workforce as well as through the literature. And I really appreciated the acknowledgement of that in the work that we did in putting this together, bearing in mind that the people we are putting it together for needs to resonance, and it needs to value add, and it's not something that we're asking of them again on top of everything else we're asking of them. So I feel for me there was something really pertinent and attuned in taking that sort of very respectful approach to the practice, wisdom and knowledge that is held in our own workforce. So we did a contemporary literature review around risk, and it was really important that be contemporary, because that is a very fast-paced, dynamic space in terms of research, especially in the context of family violence. We also held in mind very, very purposefully that for our practitioners delivering our service to our families, to our children, all the things that they have to hold in mind, potentially in very separate bubbles. KPIs, the business of the work, the theoretical frameworks, the legislative frameworks like MARAM and BICAM. And we kind of wanted to do a synthesis piece for them so that we could take that sort of burden off them, and so that we could support them to be, when they're in front of the children and young people, that they could really have the mental space to just be with them in their work. So trying to synthesize that in a background, especially in this risk chapter, was a really important task for us to get right. So we really dive deep into the principles that sit behind MARA and BICAM and tried to flow them into this chapter, into the model that we've asked our workforce to apply. We also, as TmoC mentioned, really brought in our subject matter experts, listened to them, adapted their knowledge within our model, so that we could make sure that we were culturally safe, that our way of practice was accessible to all, and recognize that safety isn't the same for everybody. So how are we adaptive? How are we fluid? How is this practice approach nimble to meet the needs? And especially this chapter that emphasizes safety in practice, and safety in practice for our children and families, but also for our practitioner. And we obviously really, through those sort of coherent, strong messages through all of those spaces, understand the value and lifted in our work the need to partner with consumers. This is not a doing to process. This is a being with process. And that was something that was a really solid message, and a real principle that was communicated from all of those spaces of sources of knowledge. And when we had our end product, we took it through our young persons advisory group to make sure that their input was really important. And that sort of messaging around working at the pace of trust. So the collaboration started right from the beginning in thinking about the methodology. So and TmoC directed me to say, Clay, we really want you to write this chapter. It was about, well, within our own workforce, who do I need to speak to? How do I get access? Bearing in mind, of course, that you're pulling people off the very busy jobs that they've got. And as TmoC said, on a more micro level, we needed representation from rural and retro teams and our TASI teams and our TASI voice. But we also needed that sort of cross-section across the hierarchy, from practitioners, team leaders, managers, senior managers, and even EOGMs. How do we capture all of their viewpoints around working with risk? And we also put a particular focus group together of early to careers. So people within who had only sort of left their studies, the unis or colleges, with less than 6 months work experience. And we put together a group because we thought that was so valuable, and that they might need this chapter the most. What would their voice be? And what would they need in this chapter, and how would it value add their practice that they're already delivering on? So that was a very thoughtful approach to who are we going to invite into the conversation. And we asked, the way we approached this and the way I approached this when I was in those focus groups and facilitating those focus groups, I was asking 2 questions, the same 2 questions to all of these people. And as I asked the questions, I put on the screen my work as I typed their answers as they spoke. So because I wanted to make it very transparent, and I wanted to make it very visible, and I wanted to make sure that I was listening to them correctly and picking up what they wanted me to pick up. So if they could see what I was typing, I was constantly checking in, I've got this right, have I heard you correctly? And I stayed very much in an information gathering role. I didn't necessarily engage with the information. I just made sure I got the information correctly in a very transparent way. And another element from that was that it was actually the feedback was, it was a very therapeutic process for them to engage with me, listening to them talk about the pressures they have in risk practice. So again, there's that dual processing that happens in our methodology. We then did the thematic analysis. There was nothing that could not be put into these 4 themes. So in their worries around, what their challenges are when they're looking at their risk assessment, and also what they feel that the themes are that they respond to in their work when they're working with risk. Practitioner capacity and confidence. And within that, what they were talking about was such a variance for, within that, there's people with very little experience working with risk, and there's people who've been working with it a very long time, but might be working with it from more historical frameworks of understanding. So there was just sort of, how do you work with such a variance of capacity and confidence of practitioners when you're trying to manage consistency and quality in your service. There was also a really strong theme of multi-agency models working across alliances. Different members of the alliances might have different thresholds of risk. Different thresholds of risk could happen in existing teams, in regions, that everybody sort of articulated. There wasn't a coherent language when it came to risk. It was a bit of a struggle, and some of the impacts of that was, well, am I right? How do I know I'm right? And I've got to speak in groups, and I've got to speak with other sector professionals. How do I back myself in that if somebody's got a different opinion? And that was a really powerful theme. Working systemically with families, incorporating the child's voice. So there was a recognized acknowledgement that this is how we should do it, but that sometimes the systems that we work in don't facilitate that very easily. So some of the business models of getting to the child, or if you're in a voluntary service and you have to engage the parent, and the parent doesn't want you to speak to the child or just give you consent, how do we actually do that to meet this sort of expectation so that was another really strong theme. And then organizational culture, reflecting competing priorities. So the want to work therapeutically, potentially having some capacity to not be delivered with the business of delivering the service delivery and the tasks. So what we did in that, just for those who like data, the themes 1 and 2 were both at 18%. Theme 3 was the least, and it was theme 4 which was the most significant theme in terms of most people spoke about theme 4 the most as a barrier and a challenge for their risk practice. So iteration, we adopted that plan, do, check, act approach. So as I said, initially I put it all on the screen. I then fed those themes back to the focus work groups, checked in with them, captured for them some qualitative comments for them, and just constantly checking in and making sure so that before we started to write, we had all of this information about what they would want to see in it. So that's closing all those information loops and making sure that we just keep washing through to clean the information and make sure we've heard it correctly and we've captured it correctly. And as time will say, that delays things and can delay deadlines in our project. And I think that was a really significant learning. And often another significant learning was information could come from different contexts, and it was very hard to capture everybody's points within the chapter. So then you had to make a kind of decision around, okay, what does that mean if I can't honor this person's input? And we decided to have a register where everybody's inputs could be captured and they could feel valued and respected, and that could be part of an ongoing review process, which I think sits in that iteration principle too. So here is our little continuum, and it's a trauma-informed relational continuum, which I've put into the safety principle. As mentioned, partnering the being with is a critical core of our practice. And we've got on the one end of that continuum the doing to, where the practitioner needs are larger than the consumer needs. The C stands for consumer. Sometimes that's really appropriate. It might be around consent forms or the business sides of the practice processes. And that's fine, but we would just sort of say, don't stay in doing to, keep getting back to being with. And in the doing for, you'll see the consumer's needs are more prioritized than the practitioners. And in that case, I could think of an example where that might be around in a voluntary CYF service, and they're working to really engage and work at that pace of trust, that they've got to put their sort of process practices to one side in risk management and just sort of focus on building trust, and that might be captured in that doing for. But again, where we want to be is being with, and in our methodology of writing this chapter and our risk model, we very much checked in with ourselves, were we being with? And so that dual kind of approach, that sort of embedding how we the methodology of how we approach the development is also captured in the actual risk wheel, where we see that sort of balance of therapeutic principles, what we call the 3 E's: empathize, empower, and engage, really capture that being with continuum, and in harmony with our relational practice is the reality of the business of practice and those practice processes, and the administration of the practice is captured in our 4 elements, and within there sits a synthesis with MARAM, for example, and Bickham, for example, in 3, their risk assessment is that partnering model. Have we got the voice of the child? Have we got the voice of the consumer? Are the goals representative of their needs, wishes, and wants? And within our analysis and plan, we developed our structured professional judgment model to support critical thinking and reflective thinking, which is about, again, sort of slowing down and really taking a moment to partner and be with and check in at all times. So we've got that kind of dual walking the talk process happening. There we go. Was I on time? Have I done well?
You have done brilliantly well, actually, to cover such a comprehensive project. I have renewed appreciation for what you've done, and I don't even know where to start with the questions. Given you were just talking to us, Claire, I'm really interested in how this model. So you've taken us through the journey. Just going to step back to yours, and then we've got lots of questions about the process, because we all know how challenging navigating those processes with such diverse groups of people actually are, to get consensus and to get a sense of being heard, seen, and got by all of those different levels. So we're going to park that just for a moment, though. This model Uniting came together about 4 or 5 years ago out of multiple different organisations. So it's a huge organisation. With your new model, how are you finding the model integrating with existing practices and services? And how are you managing changing those practices that might not align well with the new sort of model, or making even an assessment, because you can't change everything overnight? So, yeah, would you have any reflections on that?
I think in terms of the risk model itself, the risk approach really represents a contemporary paradigm shift that is already within the sector. So working more systemically is a paradigm shift that's being pushed from MARAM, which is a legislative model.
Yep.
Working with the child's voice, in a more significant way is a paradigm shift that's been pushed from MARAM and Bickham. And of course, our contemporary research, supports their shifts in our legislative frameworks and is captured in our model of care. But I do think there is a gap between what we know we should do and how we do and can we do, and the congruence and consistency of the application of these things in practice. And I think that's sometimes not understood in terms of the complexity of that piece of work right there. It's great that we conceptualize and we develop these really constructs, and that is implementation science, isn't it, Mandy? The application of it, closing that gap, but also closing that gap in a way that is attuned to the challenges and supportive of the reality of the application of methodologies, research, evidence-based practice in the way that we need it to do. So I do feel a weight of responsibility, especially as my program sits in that application space in terms of the Principal Prac program, to support it. And I think we were all multiple conversations that I recall about, is this reasonable? What is the reality of applying it? And I think that's where our methodology was critical in reducing and mitigating the risk of developing something that's solid theoretically, but potentially has vulnerability in its application. Did I answer your question? Yeah,
you absolutely did. And I mean, it's a really realistic answer you gave too, because through no one's ill intent or anything else, there have been really big shifts in the way these practices and our response to get the best outcomes for children and families are sort of understood now. And there's some quite real barriers to doing that. I suppose I'm sort of interested as well in what would be things that you're already finding help people, because this is a journey. This is going to be a journey,
Yeah.
help people adjust to the idea of going on that journey and feeling seen in the process, the learning process of that journey.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's not going to be quick. Paradigm shifts don't happen overnight. Capacity building and maturation is in itself something that requires a lot of input and thought. What is helpful is, I mean, we're going to move to that maturation process. That's something that's on the horizon. But I think is this kind of layered approach that we've taken in that partnering with, that being with model of, we know that training's not going to do this. So, we've got to get in. And that, again, I think is where the principal program and infrastructure is quite critical. So training, coaching, secondary consults, really understanding what the value add is. And again, not doing the doing too, hey, we've got this really great idea, we've researched it, we've put years into it, just do it, okay, being really curious. And I think curiosity sits underneath all of those principles in a way that it invites conversation, reflection, critical thinking, and working at a pace of accessibility to change.
Yeah.
We don't
And
want to tip it.
Like through your whole process, you've been really strengths oriented, because there's nothing that shuts people's learning down more than if they feel like they're going to be criticized. But by the virtue of your developmental process, you've already taken them on the journey for quite some considerable time.
Yeah.
In terms of these ideas.
Mandy, I was going to jump in and just talk about the importance of leadership in that sort of inviting people to come along that journey. And we still have a very long way to go. So I'm presenting this information transparently and honestly in terms of our the organizational journey ahead, but we are seeing some really positive signs. Someone shared with me there was some conversation at the executive around some of the options we have for our emergency relief and some of the the cards that we might give some of our consumers. And someone from our finance team said at the executive, is this approach trauma-informed, and does it reflect the perspective of our consumers and our workforce? And so to have someone from finance say that, means hopefully we're kind of trending in the right direction, because usually that perspective would be, someone from a practice orientation would say that. But I think although we have a very long way to go, there have been some leaders that have really understood that this makes sense in this context, because these are the communities that we are working with. And one of our senior managers came up to me recently, and they had to do a sort of tricky piece of work, and one of the workforce members went up to her and said the way you conducted yourself really reflected our approach to trauma-informed leadership. Well done. and so you're starting, you start to get a bit of an organizational momentum, around, okay, we don't quite know step by step what is this going to look like, but we kind of have a vision for where we want to go. No one has the answer in terms of getting us there, so we're going to have to kind of do this and work it out together. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose from my point of view, because of course Open is really interested in supporting evidence-led practice and decision making, and that's its very own paradigm shift. And I feel a bit the same as you do in terms of ebbs and starts and pockets and whatever else. And I'm just so thrilled that clearly that is what you've been really embracing through this process. So I'm really hoping we might be able to write something up about that process. And I'm really interested in sort of circling back to the development sort of model. And so you engaged really, really broadly, clients, young people, practitioners, all with their own nuances in terms of supporting authentic and trusting engagement. And I'm wondering how and whether there were, how you managed any conflicting themes that might have come out of these processes, and how you manage stakeholder expectation around that.
Yeah, that was tricky. There's one example comes to mind. So as you could all imagine, the our family violence chapter had a very strong gendered lens. And so we had some case examples, and we had some of our trans stakeholders query why so many of the case studies had a very strong gendered sort of focus. And so we had to do a very sort of delicate process around sort of unpacking that, and why a gendered lens was so prominent. And so there were times when the feedback between different stakeholders, when there was tension sort of between it. Another example was we had people who had experienced institutional abuse review some of the content as well. And they picked up content and said, things that I had written or even read this multiple times and had not picked it up, but had shared things like, well, given Uniting's history in the context of institutional abuse, how can you say that? And so what that meant is that I had to take that information back to our CEO and have conversations with them around, well, if we're going to say this, how do we acknowledge Uniting's history of institutional abuse in that context? And Bronwyn was very, very receptive to those sorts of conversations, but we're able to work with both stakeholders, so people who had histories of institutional abuse, and our CEO, and mediate a sort of way forward where we were able to talk about the model of care as part of our contribution to healing, in the context of our history of institutional abuse. So that's kind of where we landed. But yeah, those conversations, as you can imagine, because each of those stakeholders feels incredibly passionate about these issues, and so it required a lot of emotional intelligence to sort of navigate that, but also receptiveness on both sides to work our way through that.
Some difficult conversations with your CEO and your organisation.
Yeah.
Good on you. I suppose if other people, and we're seeing this more and more, youth groups engaging clients' voices, engaging children's voices. I'm, engaging the practitioners and your workforce's voices. I think that's really fascinating too, because I haven't seen that as much in sort of the framing around things in such a systematic way. If you wanted people to take something away, what would you say? Two things were the features of how you did it that were key to its success, and what were the 2 or 3 things that you learnt that you wouldn't, that were tips and tricks? Avoid this if you can.
Yeah. I think what was one of our saving graces was I think the humility we tried to imbue within the project team, that we were curious and we wanted to understand, and so I think that positioning within your project team And for that positioning to be manifest in people's experience of you was fundamental, because I've been in the sector for quite some time, working in trauma related areas, but really this project highlighted how much I don't know, particularly when we needed to begin thinking about methodology. So theory, no problem, but how does that actually translate into a methodology that will deliver a final product? So I think this idea of being comfortable with not knowing, failing forward, reaching out to people who do know, and Mandy, you're one of those people, and we've kind of recruited you to hang around for a bit longer in terms of the project. But all of those people we collaborated with, it was really about, like, we know some things, but there's a lot we don't know. Connect with us and help us find a way through this. So I think that was fundamental to the project's sort of success. And in terms of things that I would avoid doing in retrospect, I think scope is very challenging. So in the course of the project, we identified many aspects of the organization that required maturing, and sometimes we're very tempted to jump into those spaces, but it really threatened derailment of the project, because it's like a renovation of a house. As you get into that other room, all of these other areas sort of pop up. So I think a governance structure, including a steering group and an advisory group, to really hold you to your core deliverables is really important. So I think there were a couple of times early in the project where we stumbled into these areas that needed attention, were out of our scope, but I think we kind of sort of fell into trying to address them because we were kind of already doing transformation work. And I think that threatened to kind of derail the project. So we had to work our way back from that, which was challenging in some instances.
Isn't that always the way? Just the discipline to keep your eye on the ball you're actually trying to hit, rather than all the others that have been thrown at you.
Yeah.
It's really good insights. We're almost finished, but I suppose I just had one more question, because I'm really interested in the partnerships you built through this process with both those with your workforce, but also with your client and consumer groups. And I'm wondering whether those processes will continue, and what you see as their ongoing benefit, if there is one.
Yeah, so the Young Persons Advisory Group has remained. So that probably one of the most significant outcomes of the project was the development of the Young Persons Advisory Group. It was really interesting to hear when in the establishment of the group, they unanimously shared that they are all there because when they were receiving services on behalf of Uniting, no one ever asked them what they wanted or needed. So they felt it was important to be part of this Young Persons Advisory Group because they didn't want other young people to have the same experience they had in their service experience at Uniting. So that was very powerful to hear. And they've played a really important role in the shaping of the model of care. So we've decided to continue to maintain the Young Persons Advisory Group. They're now heavily involved in supporting us with the development of the training and coaching program, but we will continue working with that Young Persons Advisory Group. We don't have an end date in terms of their work with us. Claire, I'm thinking, in terms of some of your partnerships.
Well, I think a really strengthened partnership with our quality and business team, to the point that we've developed a bit of a roadshow myself as the trauma-informed relational clinical practice person and the head of quality, trying to move that sort of compliance sphere within the organization and to offer and invite more thinking around that practice excellence is a harmonious integration of both relational practice and the business of the work that we do in terms of processes and the frameworks that we need to sit in. And so I think that's been a really strong partnership that's landed very well, because we keep getting requests to go along to our areas and talk more about that, and we take that our continuum, the doing to being with doing for continuum, to invite everyone on every level to reflect in all of their interactions, and in the interfaces that is very inherent in the work that we do. I mean, we're not in bubbles working on our own in this kind of work. Everything is relational, and very reliant on collaboration and respect and partnering. And so, for me, that probably evidences a shift that is cultural within the organization, where potentially there was more of a kind of lane you stayed in, and now there is much more conscious, mindful, and purposeful interface.
Beautifully said. It sounds a really deep experience, and we'll be really interested to see how you move forward. And I mean, I really love opportunities to bring people back in a little bit later to reflect on because it's going to be an ongoing journey. So if we have that opportunity in future, I'd really love to take that. We've run out of time now, so in the interest of keeping to time, which, to be really truthful, I often have a lot of difficulty doing, I'll thank Claire and Timo. Thank you so much for generous sharing, and so authentic as well. Often can be a bit tempting to sort of gloss over some of the challenges in it, and it's really in the learning that these types of processes have the most value, both for you and for everyone else. So thank you so much for that, and you always speak so beautifully. Oh my God, you're so good. Now I just want to say a few more final comments about Open, to let you know about some of our exciting resources and events we've brought online. Very exciting news. We've just launched a brand new topic spotlight on trauma-informed care. This is a collation of comprehensive information on our Open portal. You'll see the link hopefully in the chat. It's designed and curated to support those working with children and families with their trauma-informed work. So it's very in keeping, which is why we've launched it here. Thank you, Timo and Claire, again. It offers a wealth of resources, including research, webinars, training opportunities, case studies, and resources. Covering organisational program and practitioner needs, the Spotlight is your go-to source for material that it will enhance trauma-informed service delivery. So instead of having to look for a library for some key resources, we're really hoping that these Spotlight pages we're developing will respond more effectively to our sector's need for timely and quick information. It'll be regularly updated to ensure the most relevant and recent resources are available to support your work. And I'd like to put out an invitation. We have had a variety of sector players provide us content for these pages, and we would really like to welcome opportunity for anyone else who is in this space, if they'd like to share their own content or ideas of resources that would be important to include. The link's in the chat, and we'd really love you to have a look and provide any feedback. And of course, any new additions are always welcome. On our last piece of news, we have just started to promote our next event. This event is part of our cross-peak collaboration project with Safe and Equal No to Violence and Sexual Assault Services, who are building a family violence and sexual violence knowledge hub. So any of you in the audience in that service system or working with children and families who have experienced family violence. The hub will be aimed at strengthening practice and knowledge, research knowledge, and access to resources for those working with children, young people, and families experiencing family violence. And so commonly, child and family services, even if the service is not focused on family violence, are in the space of supporting these families. The Knowledge Hub is on promoting children's mental health and wellbeing in the context of family and domestic violence, and it will be delivered by Emerging Minds. Registrations are now open for this online event. It's on August the 22nd at 12:30. It's our second event with Emerging Minds, who offer fantastic insights into children's mental health and wellbeing and promoting organisational cultures that centre children's wellbeing across all services. Really great group of people. And finally, we're very excited we've just announced we are taking expressions of our interest for the Open Symposium 2024. This will be our 8th symposium. It's really usually our biggest event of the year. Our theme this year is Transforming Futures, Improving the Lives of Children and Their Families. The Open Symposium serves as a platform, if you haven't heard of it, to showcase promising practices, evidence-led programs and cutting-edge research, and fostering collaboration across our diverse children and family service sector and research sector and policy sector. We get a really diverse audience at the symposium. Each year we aim to increase the impact of our work, and this year is no exception. Our annual symposium will be on October the 23rd and the 24th, and tickets will be available soon. But if you feel that you have a program that you would like to share at the symposium, or even in our ongoing events program, we are currently seeking expressions of interest. So the link is in the chat. It's through our newsletter. If anyone here isn't a member of our free newsletter, this is where all our events and activities are promoted, and please reach out to us and we'll ensure you're included. That's about it, I think. Thank you very much. And I'm 1 minute early. That's new. Thank you so much, everyone, for making the time today. Realise everyone's really busy, and keep warm. It's very cold, and we'll see you at our next event.